a online like teacher, and so he actually has done a lot of the tech for church. And so they're all like, "We're so glad that he's here.
Yeah.
He gets to be the superstar."
Are you all
Awesome.
okay if I start us off with some of our Zoom instructions for those who are gathering? All right.
That sounds great.
I'm a little bit farther away because Laurel's actually our panelist today, so I'm not going to be scripty. I'll be the person who just supports their partner from behind them. Um, you are in a Zoom webinar for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, and John might pop up at any moment. And what I want you to know about Zoom, if you're not familiar with it, is that there are two separate input boxes. One is the comment box, where you can write any thoughts or feelings or share resources that you want to share. The other is the Q&A box. The Q&A box is where you want to put questions that you want the panelists to think about and to maybe answer. And I'll also, for those who are watching on the Facebook Live, be lifting up some of those questions and getting them to Pastor Amanda as well to bring into the conversation. And so there will be, for those on Zoom, a follow-up survey if you want to fill it out. Unfortunately, I think the survey currently only allows people to fill it out once, but we're working on fixing that. And you can find a link to this recorded video if for some reason you have to step out or you want to share it with your congregation at justlutheran.com. Before we start our town hall, I like to remind people that being open and having frank conversations in a town hall setting is hard. It's a leap of faith, in fact. And so the people who are joining us today are just going to share their own experiences and not speak for other people other than their own experiences. They are doing a brave thing. Sometimes technology has hiccups. Kids might run through the screen. Things might fall over, sound might go out, and we will roll with it in the gracious way that God loves and cares for us. So with that, I hand this over to Pastor Amanda.
Thanks, Pastor Megan. Echoing all of that, thank you, both of you, for being here. I really appreciate it. Why don't we probably start out? I'll tell you that my name is Pastor Amanda Trushinsky, and I am currently the pastor serving Christ the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in San Jose, California. My pronouns are she, hers. I identify as bisexual or queer, and I am a woman who is fat and loving it. So if the two of you could also identify yourselves, tell us your name or how you'd like to be called, and then some things about your identity that you think are relevant for today.
I'm Laurel. I am Megan's wife, who was there a minute ago. I identify as queer, and my pronouns are she and her. What else is there to say about me? I never grew up in the church. I was not religious. My family is not religious. So the first time I really ever went to church was when I started dating Megan. So, but now I spend a lot of time doing churchy things. So there's that. Yes.
Thanks.
And I'm Pastor Caitlin Pabo-Yulberg. I serve half-time as a pastor at a small congregation that's both Lutheran and Episcopal in rural Alaska. I will also serve half-time as a chaplain at the local hospital. And my pronouns are she, hers. I am a white cisgendered female who's married to a white cisgendered male. And one of the reasons that Megan talked to me about being a part of this is that I am a compulsive overeater and have been working to be in recovery for the last 6 years, which has greatly shifted a lot of my mindset.
Yeah, I bet it has. Wow. Thank you for both of you being here. I know we probably have someone else joining us later, but we're going to forge ahead and let him join in when he's able. And I think one of the things that what Pastor Megan is trying to do with these town halls is talk about the many different ways that we experience being a part of the church or part of the Lutheran Church specifically for us. For either of you, is there a way that who you are in your multitude of identities or in any one of them informs or influences the way that you are in faith or spiritually, both individually and communally? Does anything stand out in your minds?
I've always, like I said, my family was not religious. On my dad's side of the family, I have Jewish, like Holocaust survivors, but not religious. And then my mom, I think, went to church a little bit. But so when I started dating, I'd always been sort of vaguely, amorphously suspicious about the church, not through any like direct experience, but just being like a liberal queer woman, sort of feeling like, I don't know. But then when I started dating Megan, when we met, I said that I was raised hippie heathen, which is sort of how I was raised. But you know, my parents are liberal, pretty accepting of lots of things, and I started to experience church through Megan as a like I was like, okay, I don't know about religion that much, but if this is how I can experience it, then I like this way. This, you know, like to me, like I can't get caught up in like what we did before or what we did in the past because I don't have any of that. And like I don't know how things are done. I don't know all the biblical stuff. Like you know, I was baptized, Megan baptized me a few years ago. And I identify as a Juthrin, but I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Wait, just for the people listening, that's Jewish and Lutheran, right?
Yes,
Okay.
Lutheran, yeah. But I don't really know. Like, I'm very ish on all the ish scales. So, but like but I like the thing I liked the most about church was the community. And when Megan and I started dating, I started volunteering at St. Francis Lutheran in their meal program. And so I would get up at some ungodly hour and feed the homeless every Sunday. And like, I really liked that. I liked being part of the community. I liked taking care of people. I liked giving people food that didn't have access to food. And I like that part of it was a community. And then when Megan started at Grace, I really liked the community there. So the community aspect was always something that really appealed to me. Yeah.
Mm.
And I am a double pastor's kid. Both my parents are ordained Lutheran pastors. So I have very churchy experiences. But they both were called to just really diverse contexts, or not what you would see like as a typical Lutheran context, which that is, again, rooted in white supremacy too. I grew up in an African-American context, and then we shifted to college ministry for my mother's call. And so just understanding that faith was present and God is present in all things. I remember I had but we had someone who was Indigenous come and talk about their experience of their faith. And he was like, yeah, God is in all things. Like we see like the divine in all things. I was like, me too. And he's like, no, it's not that. Like 9-year-old me was like, no, like we're the same. And he's like, no, there's like, he was trying to explain to me all the ways that Christianity has been colonializing the whole country. That I did not understand. Now I do. So I've been able to have a faith that has just continually taking the boundaries off of things. And I really love delving into those questions. But yeah, it is all centered around food. I remember one of my first times of like thinking, realizing, am I a compulsive overeater, was when I was in 3rd grade. My music class had a pizza party. And in my head, I had this in my head, if I don't get at least 3 slices of pizza, I am going to die. Like that's like how strongly I felt about needing all of the pizza. And the places where we would have food like that was a lot at church, in the various different events that we had. And I also, like Laurel, volunteering at homeless shelters was something that was really formative for my faith, because I started doing that starting the age of 8, going and volunteering every month with the church and feeding the homeless. And that's something that we also do here, working at the food bank every week. And something that I realize is that, we equate with food with love. And there's many beautiful ways that is true. As an infant, that's our like connection to our mother and being fed. But wondering if like how our faith can evolve into sacraments that don't necessarily always go to that one place of food, and always having every church event has some type of sugar or some type of food that can be like soul comforting, but it often doesn't necessarily help me live my day-to-day life, because I get into food obsession. So trying not to get into that cycle. A lot of my food stuff just comes from not being able to self-soothe myself, or I'm an extreme introvert, which I did not know until I started recovering from overeating. And that was because I work myself too hard, and then in order to compensate, I eat sugar or other foods in order to keep going. And so recovery from overeating has included having to have a smaller load, and saying no to things, because I'm realizing, oh, that's the way that I can actually do my life and live a life that has limits. My stomach is small. My life has to be small. Oh, let me decline. Damn call. Yeah.
You bring up, I mean, you're jumping right in, and I feel like while you were talking, I'm like, okay, yeah, we would talk about that, talk about that, talk about that. So now I want to jump in and ask all these questions that I also experience around church. But before I do, I just want to remind people who are watching on Zoom or on Facebook that you can type questions into the chat in both places. And if you type those questions in, we'll try to include them in our list as well in this hour. But Caitlin, you bring up the same thing that I also think about around identity and church, is that maybe if for white folks like us, it's hard to separate culture and church sometimes, because for us, they've been so integrated. And as white people, that's been reinforced as correct, even though it's not. But so much of our church culture revolves around communal eating. It revolves around sharing food. Our sacraments, one of them is just about a table of abundance where we share in food together and where God promises to meet us. And I love that we take that seriously, but we don't always reenact that in other church rituals with care for each other. Or at least I think that's possible. Have either of you ever experienced bias? Caitlin, you talked about the overeating culture or the not having sugar around. Have either of you experienced biases that you can talk about around food or around body issues? I'll just say, as an umbrella term, that you could share that you've experienced at church.
Yeah, I think I'm also a type 1 diabetic, so I have an insulin pump, and then that's like your whole mind, you're always consumed with food. You're like counting everything and calculating everything. And so like, it's both your like biggest enemy and your biggest friend. Like, it's a very weird relationship. But in terms of church, there's this weird sort of dichotomy I've noticed, not just in food, but like there's simultaneously, this is the way we've always done it, and we have to keep doing it, and we don't want to talk about anything that is hard. Like you don't never want to, like, everything was great at this one time and it should always be that way, but all these bad things happen, but that's in the past and we don't want to talk about it. So I sort of feel like that sort of comes up in like the food. It was like sort of weird to me that there's like all these like Lutheran foods. Like I was like, I didn't know that was like a thing. Like all the weird, like, it's a salad. That's not a salad. It's made with like jello and whipped cream. But like, like I was like, okay, that's weird. And like, so I do a lot of I did when we all met in person. I did a lot of the coffee hour cooking, and like, I love that. I love taking care of people. And we try to be progressive. We like have gluten-free people. We have vegetarians. So I would try to do like all of the things. But there is an aspect of, if you try to go too healthy, people are not happy. Like, they really are just like, I'm not really into, where's the dessert? Like, so like, there's an aspect of that, and everybody likes, that, like, that sweet treat. But yeah, I think there's an aspect of like, and also in like the physical church buildings, I feel like are weird sometimes too. Like, our church, like, we've done a lot of remodeling and changed a lot of things, but like the bathroom stalls were like this big, and you had to like turn sideways to shut the door. Like, there's a lot of things that, like, I mean, I know it's just like eras of when things are built, but like there's definitely a way of like, this thing has been built this way and it should never change, and if it changes, like, that you're taking apart like my faith or my belief. And like, that's weird for me because I don't have that connection, but I can sort of understand where it's coming from. But I also think that food operates in a similar way, that people are like, this is the kind of food that I want to eat. And it's not always the healthiest way of interacting like with each other. I mean, communal meal is great, but it's also like, there's a lot of sugar. There's a lot of like, yeah.
But yeah, what I hear you saying is that one of the ways we experience bias is that when we're trying to feed and sustain and show our love through food, which a lot of people do, that we are unintentionally perhaps harming people by what we offer them to eat. I am with you. The donuts only for coffee hour or sweets only for coffee hour. I love sugar. Sugar is my favorite thing in the world. And it's not loving to me to have it all the time or have that be the only option. Yeah.
I'm
or
like,
I know
I do too. I have a total sweet tooth, which is really not a good thing to be a diabetic and have a sweet tooth, but I totally do. And I'm just like, and sometimes I feel like I used to be at work when they'd only have donuts and stuff. I'd always be like, it's a hostile work environment. Like, why do you like, so like, I feel that way sometimes. Yeah.
But it seems like we aren't the only ones. Every one of us is caught in that strange space of wanting to shower each other with abundance and treats. We call them treats, right? But in treating one another, what are we doing to each other's bodies? And I think that I don't know if it is where you live, Caitlin, but I know for Laurel and I, where we live, the acceptance of a wide variety of diets is a lot easier than in some other parts of the world or in the country. And so we see this again with people who have other dietary needs, people who are gluten insensitive or people who are ovo insensitive, can't have lactose, lacto insensitive as well, dairy or eggs, ovo, eggs, insensitive. Their bodies are harmed by these things. And I think there's enough conversation to say, well, then they need to come up with their own options or they can supply themselves, but that doesn't really ring with that same impulse we have to lavish each other with abundance.
Yeah.
Are there other ways that you experience bias, either of you, around feeding rituals or communal meals or anything that we haven't covered?
I think it's like the hard thing for me is when people just assume that like talking about food or talking about bodies is okay. I was visiting a church in Seattle, and the preacher, it was like the bread of life, like that like rough time in August when it's all about bread. And the preacher
in the lectionary, Pastor.
Yeah, sorry, in the lectionary. Sorry, Pastor. Okay. So there's the month which we talk about bread a lot in the lectionary, and the preacher decided to talk about a food that's one of their favorites, which is one of my number one trigger foods. And I was new to Seattle. They named the streets. They named 5 different places where I could get this trigger food. Oh, no. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it's like being like, okay, this is where you get the meth. This is where you get that. Like, and I was just like, oh my God. I thought about leaving.
Like, who's your dealer? Like,
yeah. I was like, I don't know what to do with this. This is so triggering. Like, this is not gospel. And people just don't necessarily have that mindset of like, what am I going to say about food that can trigger people? What am I going to do? Or like in the midst of a lot of like my journey around food, like the judgment people have. I was at a potluck and I grabbed like a small amount of food that I wanted to eat, and then I was going to go back for more, but someone was like, is that all you're eating? Like people have this idea that like they get to decide what to say about your body, to be able to ask invasive questions around it. As someone who's married, I get a lot of comments about my body around pregnancy and like thinking like that I am pregnant for some reason, or like feeling like they can touch my stomach. And that's just, it's really triggering in the midst of just trying to be a pastor, like, and care for these people. So caring for people while also holding boundaries for myself.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Like once you talk about, or like once people know, like I don't mind talking about my disability or diabetes or anything like that, but once people know about like anything related to food, like you're vegetarian, you're gluten-free, you're diabetic, people will feel like they need to interject themselves into whatever you're eating. Like you can eat that, you can't eat that. Like they'll just like start like giving you judgments, or they'll like name everything that they see that you could eat or couldn't. And it's like always like, yeah, it's not really like your place to talk about like what I can or can't do. But like everybody's, I think it probably comes from a place of people wanting to care for that you and not really knowing how. But yeah, everybody like will always want to comment on what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah. Language is hard, and knowing how and when to talk is really tricky. So I think we have an opportunity to talk about good and bad practices around that. I know that there are parents watching with their children, and they're talking about what are some ways that, okay, my child experiences the word fat as negative. And so that's one way that we talk about language. How do we use the word fat or see it? But I also have a question here about somebody who says that they feel shame around their thoughts about food, or about how people, another one about how people talk about food. So what are some ways into that conversation for you? You've both talked about triggers that come from a public setting, or even triggers that come from a personal interaction. What's a way to start talking about food that is healthy and affirming for you, or at least about bodies?
For me, it's really important. Oh, sorry, Laurel. It's really important to talk about food in like, these are foods that I always have. These are foods that I sometimes have, rather than using good or bad food. I hear a lot of people saying like, oh, I'm going to do a bad thing, or I'm going to have this bad thing. And that can be really negative. And I have to work on just myself not having a lot of shame around just choosing like, this is what I'm going to eat today, and it's okay. I don't usually have this food, but I'm going to have it today, and that's okay. There's not putting the level of shame on it. And I think the more you talk about being a compulsive eater or having issues around food, the less stigmatizing it feels, and just saying like, this is just something that a lot of people might struggle with, because once you say it, then people just go and it's kind of like opening a little lid, and people just really need to chat about it. I know that Cindy also, I see she asked a question about seeking recovery around food. Is it okay if I answer
Sure,
that?
go for it. We are freewheeling here.
Yeah. So I have had experiences where I saw a therapist for a different issue that completely unrelated, and then once we got through that and we felt like we were in a good space around that, I brought up my food, and she was the one who recommended that I go on a diet. And so she recommended a certain diet for me, actually. And I was on a diet for a little while, and then I felt like I wanted to break that diet, getting into like diet culture. Ugh, so I have such a hard time with that.
We'll get there.
And I thought about, because I ate a food that was not part of the diet, and I thought, I better throw this up, because I was, I wasn't supposed to eat this. And I was like, that's like bulimia. Like, I need to get away from that. So I was like, okay, no more to that diet. And just in general, like feeling like everyone could see it, that I had a food issue. I was in this like cycle of body hatred, shame, of like, everyone knows this is my issue because they just can see me and know that that's what's going on for me. And so with that, within grad school, I started doing a lot more exercising. I had previously not loved that. And so I just did that. And I realized that even though I was doing a lot of working out, I was still eating. Like, I was like, oh, I can eat more. And realizing that it was just a way for me to be able to continue binging at a level that was not really healthy. And it also coincided with dating someone, and feeling like, wow, I'm actually like loved and seen for who I am, and realizing, I really actually want to take care of myself. I want to address this in a deeper level that hadn't been possible before. And so that was really what was kind of the push for me to go into recovery spaces. And I have been a part of a 12-step program. I know I'm only one person. I don't speak for the whole program, so I won't name it. But that it is really important to be around people who can help you talk about these things. And they recommend that you actually go to a nutritionist, because as someone who's a disordered eater, you don't have any idea of what healthy food is. And so I went, and they were really useful and helped me see a completely different food plan that works specifically for my body, not necessarily looking at anybody else's, but just how I can be healthy myself.
And I am a parent. I have two kids, and I find myself repeating a lot of the, I think, maybe not so helpful things that my mom did, which is not something I want to do, but often very hard not to, like, repeat our upbringing. And like I said, my parents were very health food when I was growing up, very crunchy granola, like no sugar, no anything. And my brother, I have a twin brother, and he's also type 1 diabetic, but he was diagnosed when he was a baby, and I was diagnosed when I was older. So we always had like that in our family, but my parents were like, we didn't have junk food. I didn't know what candy was. Like, I think my parents maybe went too far in one direction, but I definitely find myself saying things like, you shouldn't eat that. That's bad. That's junk food. Or like, my mom is one of those people who talks about her weight a lot, like all the time, like, oh, I'm this and that. And like, so it never feels good. Like, I don't want to pass that on to my kids. Like, though it comes up occasionally when they, we're calling people fat as a negative, and like, we don't want to reinforce that as a parent. It's hard, especially when you have your own like body stuff that's not super great. Like, so I want to be more conscious of that, because I don't want my kids to have food issues. They're like super healthy, super like, they're doing great, active. But I do find myself repeating like my mom's phrase of like, oh, I shouldn't eat that, or I'm so like, this is terrible, and blah, 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 and this is junk, and that is good. And yeah, I think that intellectually the idea of, I don't eat, moderation, or like, this is something that we should eat a lot of. And I think that's definitely probably more helpful, but it's very hard to sort of rise above your own stuff for a lot.
All that stuff that's been ingrained into us, whether intentionally or not.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
No,
I was just gonna say, because my parents were so like health food, I have such a negative opinion about food. I'm like, and as a parent, like, when I thought before I was gonna be a parent, I would be one of those parents that was like, all pure, no processed, no junk, like just everything. And then you're like, oh, I have to work. Like, like, I don't have time. Like, it's just like, it's hard. It's a lot of work. And like, and it's like, it's okay, like, And I think, totally unrelated, I think one of the things my kids love about communion so much is the grape juice, that they're really into that is grape juice. But I mean, they like this, they love all that stuff. Church, they love communion for other reasons too, but like, I think Jesus, they love it for Jesus. No, but but I don't, like I said, I don't, like, I try to be conscious of it, because like, it's a hard thing.
Yeah, it's so ingrained. I don't even know if we are realizing how ingrained it is. I know, I remember doing some reading on this about how did we get this idea that thin equals closer to God or better in God's eyes. And it's so old. I remember reading about Charlie Shedd, who wrote a lot post World War II about how fat is your sin hanging on your body. And I've never heard that until I read about it, but I think it's so ingrained in the way that we relate to one another, and the way that we talk about junk food or eating is good or bad in certain circumstances with certain things, that's just built in the foundation. I know I want to speak specifically to the person who hears fat as a negative term. And it was in relation to that reading and finding out where those ideas come from, that they come from an actual person who has their own issues and their own struggles and their own interpretation, and not from God. There's nowhere that I've ever found in the Bible where God said, if you're fat, I don't love you anymore. But it doesn't mean that just because we know that, we can switch our understanding and our thinking of ourselves. I don't know if either of you have ever seen or engaged in any of the body positivity movement, but I find it really joyful and inspiring and exciting. Not only because I love beautiful pictures and I love when people are kind to each other, and that's a space often in that community where that happens, but I remember one woman talking about how she had to retrain her brain by looking at pictures of women of all sizes and see what she could identify with them, and really ask herself, exactly why do I think this isn't beautiful, or why do I think this isn't ugly? And I took that to heart when I was, I don't know, younger, or actually going through seminary probably is when it was, and really did that myself as well, and tried to start retraining my brain. Well, why do I think that this isn't beautiful? But it really helps when others reflect outside of your body that it's also beautiful. So you can tell those things in your head and you can practice them. But when others reflect that who you are in whatever shape you are is beautiful, that's really useful. So I think that's one thing I would say that the church can do to minimize bias, in the same way that we do around other kinds of identity, is to be very explicit when we say God loves X, Y, or Z. And in this case, God loves your body if it is skinny, or God loves your body if it is fat. You are beautiful if you are ABC, whatever, all of the ways that it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Did either of you had, yep, go for it, Laurel.
I said I feel that way too. And I feel it towards other people. It's very hard. I still don't quite get it for myself most of the time. But yeah, I totally feel that. I'm I think all body sizes are beautiful, and I don't it doesn't matter to me. But for myself, I'm no, but not me. Yeah, and it's weird that we equate thin with a lot of things that are not necessarily true, like health and all that stuff. And the skinniest I ever was as an adult was when I was really sick before I was diagnosed with diabetes, and I lost I don't even know 30 pounds in a very short time, and I was skinny, but everybody kept saying, oh, you look so good, and I was like, thank you, I can't get out of bed. It was I was so sick, and everybody was like, you're losing so much weight, does that feel good? And I'm like, no, it does not feel good, it feels very, very bad. It is weird, and it's yeah, and that is reinforced a lot by people, the way people talk about, oh, I have to do this if I want to maintain my figure, and yeah, it's a tough thing. Yeah.
Let's try to imagine, if we can, just to give people other alternatives. What would be a different way that people could talk to you about your body shape or your eating habits that would be loving?
I think just listening, asking people what best works for their body for eating, and then celebrating that and being attentive. That's something that my church has done really well at. I was really nervous to come to a rural area, having moved from the Bay Area to a tiny town, and I told them that I was gluten-free and dairy-free because that works the best for my body. And they were like, okay, let's do this. And they have figured out how to feed me. They've all altered their recipes to make sure that it can fit within my role. And whenever there's a potluck, I know that there's special food that they have made for me. And usually coffee hour, that's not necessarily a thing. That's every Sunday. But I'm pretty good at saying, oh, that's not for me, it's a toy. That's kind of how I see the foods I can't eat. Is this a toy? Do I want to pick it up or not? And usually I don't. Trying to think what else. Oh, there's that song, there's a hymn. It's called As the Grains of Wheat.
Yeah.
And I picked it for us for one Sunday. And when I got there, they had made a copy that they had rewritten it because they're like, but that's not inclusive for you, Pastor. So now it's as the seeds of grain.
Oh, how sweet.
That's super cute though.
Also, I want to thank you.
Oh, and Megan says they want a copy of that. You're as the gluten-free,
Yeah.
flour, oat flour blows in the breeze. Yeah.
So, and then
I love that.
what else did they do? There was another thing. Oh, we started doing, so we had gluten bread that people made, and it was very they beloved bread recipe. And then once I got there, they started doing a little bit of like gluten-free cracker for me. And then we transitioned slowly this past year to a gluten-free bread. And we had a couple of the kids that were like, that tastes gross. Like it was a couple Sundays when like one of them, it tasted like chocolate malt. And you're like, how? There's no chocolate. Just very strange. And they kept trying and trying. And I ended up doing a communion bread baking class. And so even the kids that were like, this is so gross, I'm never eating this, because they made it, they were like, oh,
Oh,
really
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So that was a way of kind of
Yeah.
getting them.
Really, how good is it supposed to be? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, and we did that too at Grace. We sort of just decided to default to grape juice and gluten-free just because, like, you know, you still cover all the bases. Like, if so, you're still there, you know, like if somebody can't have alcohol or somebody can't have gluten, and it's not going to hurt the people that can to have that. So yeah, I think it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back and share one of these questions we have from somebody. Here's someone who is over 50, elder, gay man, and describes himself as heavy set. And he's right now going through candidacy and says, was your weight raised as an issue in candidacy or in seminary, and how did you handle it? And Laurel, since I know you didn't go to seminary or through candidacy, maybe we could just say through, I think candidacy for a lot of people is a big identity upheaval time, and it's a time when you're trying to live into a new self and assume this role or prepare for this role. So any big change time in your life, did you was your weight raised, and how did you handle it? I'll let you talk, I'll let you think, and I'll just fill in my own and say that no, my weight didn't drastically change during candidacy, though a lot of other things did. But I think I was too poor to eat a lot of candidacy, and that's the only reason. But it did change when I first got into congregations, and partly it changed because I experienced for the first time the thing that you were talking about before, Caitlin, where I would go do pastoral visits and people would put food in front of me, and I was so afraid of hurting their feelings above caring for my own body that I neglected my body in ways that, or I just ate things that, I ate things I would never have eaten, like shrimp on buttered bread. It's not my favorite. Other people might like it. I can't believe I actually ate it. But, and then also when a congregation that I was pastoring was going through conflict, and then all of my self-care routines turned into self-soothing routines instead. And that's usually when my weight raised. But those are mine. Has there been a time in your life when your weight raised, and how did you deal with it? Oh, and how I handle it. Sorry.
Yeah. A lot of my throughout candidacy, they didn't ever ask me about it, and I actually didn't really disclose with them that I was going and doing this recovery process around food. It obviously, because I've done a lot of spiritual recovery around it, they were able to see some things. They're like, wow, what was that change about? And I didn't necessarily tell them, but yeah, they didn't talk about it. But I did have a loss of 70 pounds in seminary. And so people, I mean, a lot of seminary classmates had a lot of questions and wondering how to handle that. In my first call and in my residency as a chaplain, I definitely have had some weight gain in the midst of that. And part of that is knowing that whenever I am in emotional distress, and moving to a small town Alaska was a lot of emotional distress for me. I am a city bopper. I love going to a coffee shop and not talking to anyone and meeting no one that I know. I love alone time with strangers. I do not have that anywhere in my and the closest town is a 5-hour drive, which is not a safe thing to do right now because of pandemic. So I've had to adjust a lot of where my like quote unquote like safe introvert spaces are. And also there's no meetings in my town, so that are not specific to my program. So I'm going to other meetings that don't necessarily fit, and also include parishioners. So, you know, it's a lot of figuring out how to navigate that. And I actually haven't talked a lot with my congregation around it. They know a lot of my food choices, but they don't know necessarily some of the reasons behind it. So, and part of that is my I need to take care of myself, and I know that if I disclose, um, I maybe could be ahead of a meeting here. That would be really good. There could be good healing, but I'm not at a place where I feel comfortable to do that at that level. I don't know if that actually really answers it, but
Yeah, no, that's great. I heard a lot of the same things, that it's about knowing, what is this weight gain or loss about? Is it just about the external factors of like what food is available or what my daily life is like, or is it about something that's internal as well, or alternatively? Yeah, that's really important.
Mhm.
Laurel, did you have any particular stories to share, or no
I
is an acceptable answer?
Yeah, I haven't had it brought up explicitly like in any professional setting. I know that it is a part of the way that people everybody sees you in your work and your job and in
Mhm.
job interviews and things like that. But that people aren't explicit about it, which is okay because that's not cool. But like, but it definitely, I'm sure it has an effect on, and then like, um, yeah, I mean, mostly in personal life, people do definitely bring it up, but um, not so much in professional life.
I've had it brought up before.
Oh, go for it.
And I think the way that it gets brought up is particularly with, um, here's the way to say it, congregations that have robes that they've already purchased for their pastor,
Mm.
and they want them to fit their next pastor, or congregations that have outfits that assisting ministers wear, and someone wants to be an assisting minister that they don't have an outfit for, and they don't want to purchase a $300 robe for that person, and how do they modify it? And um, sometimes I've experienced that with like being tall versus the size of the hem on different garments. Like you, Pastor Amanda, I was someone who, I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I would buy a thing of tortilla and like a 12 pack of tortilla and a peanut butter and jelly, and that might be my food for the month. Some months, um, and so I didn't leave seminary larger than I entered seminary, but I, as a trans person, do experience people talking about my bodies all the time. And as someone who is female bodied, my weight fluctuates based on when I have my period. And people comment a lot like, you look skinnier now, which is just a thing that happens every month. But it can be very interesting to have that be the response to what they thought of the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
a big one, isn't it, for pastors, that when we talk to you after worship, we don't really want to hear how we looked or what you
No,
think
I
about
know.
how we looked, right?
People feel like in certain settings they have a lot of like ownership over other people's bodies, which is weird. And I mean, I'm obviously not a pastor, but I imagine that that is something that pastors experience, that because you're so up there and the face of everything. And like, yeah, and I know that at Grace there were all these like robes that were like everybody had made themselves and they were specifically designed to like fit blah blah blah, and like we sort of did away with people assisting ministers and stuff wearing robes because there were like 20 people there, so you're like, oh, that's kind of silly. But yeah, but it was like this like ownership of like, I'm this tall and I am this size and like I fit in this box and you don't, and that's a tough thing. Yeah.
Well, and I think too around like differently abled bodies and being able to like number one fit in the robes, but there's also like a lot of fastening and things and like having to get the rope on, and we have people that have tremors, and like that's just a lot harder to do those kind of tasks when you're nervous about being an assisting minister already. So it already like it adds so many more layers to like the possibility of this person being a leader.
Yeah, and it's probably not even reserved just to assisting ministers, but I bet anybody who is reading, serving communion, offering music, that those are anxieties that come into all of our heads of how will people see us, and I'm making myself vulnerable, we're putting my body in front of everybody, and everybody's going to be looking at me, and those are absolutely realistic anxieties that everyone has, but how our worshiping communities and how our church behaves after that person has done that thing can do a lot to setting a tone for how people are received or what part of them is most important in worship. And if we're commenting on our bodies all the time, or that's the thing that we focus on is how good you looked, or how skinny you're looking today, implication good. All these things are saying, this is what I really cared about, not, wow, you read the word of God and I heard something new today. Here's what I heard. Or thank you for serving me communion. It makes such a big difference in my life every week. Things like that. I have a question. Sorry, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say that some of the ways I feel like, that like being supportive of not putting judgment on all those things is just like not talking about it. Like yes, definitely be like inclusive in your food, the food that you have at church in terms of dietary needs and things like that. And like, people do tend to talk a lot about this recipe and that recipe, but like if it shouldn't be you shouldn't be the focus all the time. And like I've experienced this, as Megan was just talking about, like people commenting on your physical body as a trans person, and as being a partner to a trans person, like people would often ask me very inappropriate questions, and I'm just like why would you like feel that it's okay to talk about someone's body parts? Like that's super weird. And it's sort of the similar, like no matter how curious we are, or like how we have our own judgments, we should probably just like zip it, like just like because like that's what because if you talk about it all the time and you put it forth that is the most important thing. So that's what I think about. I don't always succeed, but
of course. Sorry, I've got questions piling up and I really want to do these people honor. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question from someone in Australia who says, how can we be gentle with ourselves and remind ourselves that we are doing okay during the current pandemic? My body feels gross this pandemic. I'm not going to lie. There are some days I'm like, I have not moved enough. My joints feel stiff. I roll out of bed in the morning. I'm like, hold on, I need to stretch this one out. Or at the end of the day, you're like, do I have time to go for another walk? Because this isn't enough. I think it's hard to be gentle when you don't feel good all the time. And it's hard sometimes for us to separate out what is mental illness and what is physical illness or body illness, other physical illnesses, or what is for a time and what needs to be addressed. How are you two doing?
It's hard. I'm someone who I thrive in the trauma of things. So I'm really good at like the beginning. So like that first month, I was like, yeah, this is great. But like I was like, okay, like I can do healthy things. I can like clean my desk. I can make good food. And it's gonna keep on going. This is like what, month 4, and it's really hard. It's really difficult. And I'm definitely noticing a lot of my food behaviors popping up more. And even just yesterday, I was eating a food that I don't usually eat, and I was like, this is empty. And I know that I may be eating it like to hope that I can have some more worthiness, or like that, like, self-worth come in through the food, and just knowing that that's not how it feeds me. Like, how can I feed myself in other ways? And so I have lots of tools to pick up. Do I want to pick them up right now? No. So sometimes it's like that, like really grumpy self-care of like, I guess I'm going on a walk today, or I guess I'm going to drink some tea instead of drinking an alcoholic drink because I've already had a lot this week. And just saying like, yeah, like it's okay to pick up the tools that we can. And they might not be the ones that we would have done when we were at our highest self. But it's just okay. It's okay to do that and say, what have you learned from that? So now I know, okay, that food I ate yesterday is empty. It's not going to fill me with fulfillment. How can I fulfill my soul that's clearly yearning for some sort of community? And I won't find it in food.
Yeah, it's a hard time. I mean, I feel mostly lucky that I am here with my family. I think if I was alone, I would probably be in a darker place. But but it's hard. Like, it's like I still have like a 9-to-5 job that I'm supposed to do, and I have kids, like 2 children running behind me and trying to feed them, and you know, we both work. It's just, it's a lot of stuff. And in some ways, some aspects of it are easier, you know, like I do start working my pajamas and I admit that that's kind of cool. But like, it is like, it's hard to not have the separation, and it's hard to not have, yeah, and you do end up making choices that aren't always the best. And I definitely like get up a lot of time from my chair and I'm like, I have not been outside all day long. So like I'm trying to do more of like thinking about, because I don't always have the motivation, but like I'm like, okay, I think my kids really need a walk right now. Like I think trying to find things that'll help me like get motivated to do healthy things.
I really appreciate those friends and even parishioners who, like, instead of, we could go have a pastoral care meeting over a cup of coffee in somebody's front yard, and that's lovely, and I love those. But I also love those friends and parishioners who are like, I'm going to walk my dog. You want to do it then? Yeah. And I have one friend who always calls me to go kayaking. And there are times when my anxiety or something else ramps up and I bail at the last minute, or I say, I really want to do it, but they keep asking. And I find that really helpful as well. Just keep asking, knowing that if I've said yes once, I will say yes again. And I need you to keep asking. That's real body care and love.
Want to go kayaking?
I'm going kayaking tomorrow. You want to fly?
It's a little bit of a commute, but I'm sure it's beautiful. No.
I want to ask a question from Scott. Sorry. It says, making a soy-free and gluten-free food item for a potluck elicited an interesting reaction from an elder. They thought I shouldn't have done that, and people who need that should eat at home. So he's asking, how do we educate community that even though it may not be their preference, including everybody is what we're called to do? Yeah, we talked about that a little bit at the beginning about communal eating stuff and what are some good practices. I'm trying to think of an analogy. Do you guys have any ideas of how to educate people about including people with other dietary needs?
I mean,
than our own?
You could talk about it with consent. Like, I once had a pastor who really did a great job at passing the peace, being like, we are a very huggy congregation. Sometimes people don't want your boobs up all in their grill. So, just ask if they want a boob hug and ask if they want a handshake. Just know your people.
Yeah.
And it's okay. And so like talking about consent of saying like, what do you need to feed you? And just knowing how left out people feel when you say like, no, you can just eat at home.
Right.
Like, and imagine that person, like you could say like, imagine that person carrying an empty plate and sitting next to you and just
sit there with your glass of water. Like, what do you like? It's that, right. And if it's important, I mean, just say like, like that's hard. Like, I mean, that has a sort of translates into a lot of other people's lives. I'm always like, well, what is it? Why does it hurt you that they're eating something? You don't have to eat it. Like it's, if it's not for you, it's not for you. It's also like people that have maybe this, take like people that have problems with gay people. I'm like, what does it have to do with you? Like, you don't have to marry that woman. Like, so in terms of, or just making it something that just happens, and maybe them recognizing that, seeing that the person is enjoying it, the person that it's like who has the dietary needs, like, and just like that's, maybe just incorporating it, like just being like, like when we've had vegetarians in our congregation, I would just make one thing that's vegetarian, one thing that wasn't, and or like just started making, and people adapt mostly. Like, yeah, it's like, and like, I like the consent. We used to do that with our kids because they would sometimes like get freaked out about people hugging or not touching, or like because they're foster kids. But so we would be like, you say if you want a handshake, you say if you want this, and like, so like I think that's important. Yeah.
Does it help?
I like that. Pastor Priscilla also says that they talk about special diets as more normalized as a comparison, like low sugar for diabetics or low salt for high blood pressure, and so on and so forth, but also loves our consent image. I like throwing parties with food because I like cooking for other people. Hate cooking for myself. Boring. I know how great of a cook or bad of a cook I am. I like feeding other people. But one of the things I think about when we think about church potlucks or coffee hour or any kind of communal eating is that while you're putting that together, while you're bringing the food to it, you're thinking, well, who's going to be there? who do I want to be at this gathering or at this event? And then I want to make them feel welcome. I want them to know that I anticipated your coming. I want you to be there. And part of providing food for all bodies is saying, I want you to be there. I anticipated that you are a part of this community and you were going to share in this activity with us. So I'm going to make it possible for you to do that. I love that. Parties for everybody.
I think if you say all are welcome and you say like, you know, this is an inclusive space, it actually has to, like, you should walk the walk. Like, you know, it's not like, I understand that it's harder for some people to have things that are different or new, or but if all are welcome, and you gotta like figure it out, you know.
And who doesn't love adventurous eating? Let's try something new together, right? Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off, Caitlin. I apologize.
Okay. Well, and I am someone who it's really useful for me to have a food plan. So if I know I'm going to a potluck, I will know, I have like already set in my mind, I've already texted it to someone else saying, this is what I plan to eat at the potluck. If there's not enough food there, I will eat this to supplement, because I get my head scarcity, like, oh, I can't have all this food, so I better like eat it all because it's all this food I don't necessarily prepare for myself. So eat it all. And just knowing, oh, I don't need that. And I also will prepare like a thing for myself, something that works for me. That's really good to just know, oh, that's already going to be there. And there's other people that could be like me that want it.
Good point. I just noticed I'm missing a place where there are some questions and answers. There's one that's perfect for just what you're talking about. Yeah. She says her daughter also has food issues and totally resents when people say, oh, is that all you're eating? So much that she hates communal meals like Thanksgiving. So do you have suggestions on how to help teach a congregation or family members to steer away from that sort of language in those times?
I hate Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Kinship.
It's also just rooted in white supremacy again. Just like this.
Oh, it's a national holiday. Got it.
Yeah. But in general, the meal and gorging on food, as like being the main thing can be really hard. I try to focus on and like teach people to focus on the relationship or like the people that are close to you. Cause I would love, like in my worst, I'm focusing on what I'm eating and how much more I can eat and how much more I can put on my plate that could fit in within my parameters that I've created for myself. But the best way is when I go and see like, how is this social event something that can feed me spiritually and emotionally and mentally and even physically. Again, talking about consent and just allowing for people to have that space. I had a good idea earlier.
And just not trying, I try not to do that myself, or not to like, just not make that the focus, other than like, oh, this is, you know, good, or I'm enjoying this or something like that, but like not having judgment around what other people
are. Modeling the good behavior. Yeah.
Trying anyway. Yeah.
I wonder about doing a little like teaching people to write a table prayer that includes this consent, like, and saying like, this is the prayer that we say at our church, that it says like, we nourish our bodies, we nourish each other in this connection, we honor our own food choices. That could be helpful to say like, this is the one that we own, and that could fit with even your church's mission. Our mission includes welcoming all, so that would be going on your point, Laurel, of if we welcome all, that includes whatever people eat too.
Yeah. I mean, I like that idea. Like, you know, we acknowledge that everybody is different, and
I can imagine it would be harder in a family setting than in like a public setting, like a congregation, but having alternative things to talk about so that we don't have to talk about what's on each other's plates might be a good, but getting your family to not do what they want is hard. That's much more difficult.
Yeah. And that would be finding, for me, whenever I'm in situations, that would be finding someone to text and be like, hey, this is happening. And just knowing that there's other people that are going through this too, with families that might not understand what your eating looks like, or what your body looks like.
Yeah. Setting up some space after that meal for whatever kind of healing might happen or need to happen. It's probably a good idea too. Okay, there's two questions here. I'm going to roll them into one because of the time, and I want to honor your time and thank you for being here. But both of them are about depictions of bodies in public art or media. And one person comments that they see that there are more media representations of real bodies in commercials than previous representations of photoshopped models or whatever. And another person asks, a lot of church art emphasizes slim, muscular bodies. Is there any faithful art that affirms body that speaks to you? And I think we can, do this inside of the quotations of religious art or non-religious art, either way. But faithful is a great word for all of that. Is there any faithful depiction of bodies that speaks to you?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily in terms of body diversity.
I mean, I've seen a lot of, I enjoy seeing like ethnically diverse, or like culturally diverse images, or particularly of Jesus. Like my kids are always like, they see white Jesus and they're like, that's not right. Jesus wasn't white. Like, like that kind of thing. And I'm trying to, I mean, I wouldn't be the one to ask. I know a lot about faithful art, but I do appreciate seeing more realistic depictions of body and like more like celebrities that are like into like just comfortable in their own skin. And my daughter has like one of their Barbies is like a curvy Barbie, and I'm like, she's my favorite Barbie. Like, so like yeah, like yeah. But in terms, I'm trying to think of, I don't know that much about religious art, but
Sorry, I can't pass this up. You bring up a really good point that white supremacy loves a certain kind of body, right? Like there are definitely values about body shape or size or what bodies are is different depending on what race the individual we're looking at is. Mm-hmm. And as we get more racial diversity in our imagery, we also have the opportunity to open up body shape and size diversity as well, right? Or to at least call into questions why skinny bodies are valued in whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just me thinking? Tell me if
no, I totally agree. Yeah, I think that there's other cultures have some cultures have very different relationships with thinness than we do in America, but also
or fatness.
Yeah, or fatness for that. Yes, exactly, the whole spectrum. Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, I think opening the door and being more inclusive absolutely opens it for all different aspects.
I'm sorry, I just love that intersectionality. Another reason to dismantle white supremacy is for the inclusion of all body types, right? Like, definitely. Yes!
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Which I find so strange. One of the kinds of art I really like are Rembrandt's chubby ladies, for lack of a better way. I don't know much about art, so I'm going to be super ignorant in my language right now. But I love that. And I think that Rembrandt painted a lot of what is considered normal or run-of-the-mill religious art. And yet everybody is voluptuous and well-fed and satisfied is how I think I associate the words I associate with that, whether or not it might be true. But knowing that that art exists at some point in white history at least gives me the opportunity to say that whatever exists as the white normal right now in media depictions or art has not always been that way and doesn't have to always be that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, understanding, that very much culture is tied, knowing that like 400 years ago, people that had larger bodies, you knew you were well fed. So it was like a class system. Mm-hmm. Of knowing like, oh, if you have a smaller body, then you most likely don't have any money to eat.
You're poor, or you're not healthy, you're not going to have good childbearing hips,
Mm-hmm. But I think we as a level of privilege have gone to a place where like, well, if everyone can have enough food to eat, and by everyone I mean people of privilege,
right?
Because we know that hunger is a major issue.
That everyone doesn't.
That it's like, oh, well, now you have to control your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it just like goes this deeper way, which is just really painful.
Mm-hmm.
It is very painful.
I
There's
also
just so much.
just Googled fat Jesus, and I did come up with an image.
Did you really?
But it's a white fat Jesus, just letting you know.
That close. We were that close, Pastor Caitlin.
Well, I see some art projects in the future.
I know, right? I was just going to say to everybody watching, this is your next assignment. By next week, we want to see a lot of body positive, racially diverse Jesus. Yeah.
Religious figures, yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or any religious figure, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely a tradition of the Christian church to write icons of people, to especially put together depictions of martyrs. Pick some fat ones. Let's do it.
I do love that it's being more normalized. I remember the first time I saw a stretch mark on someone's thigh. I think I was like at a Target and they had like they didn't touch it up and I was like,
That's awesome.
Look, humanity. Yeah.
Right? That's very exciting. Oh my gosh. Rubens, is it Rubens painting? Oh, somebody just corrected me in the comments and I really appreciate it, though I still don't understand art. So thank you for correcting me. I think we could go on for forever, but like I said, I want to honor your time. So thank you, both of you, for giving us your time and your energy and sharing yourselves with us. I really appreciate it. I've had such a good time talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you for being a wonderful facilitator. I'm so glad for all the people that are commenting too.
Yes, and I was just going to say, and I think this is such a cool conversation that keeps going on in our comments, both in all the platforms. So I don't know how any of these platforms work and if you all can keep talking, but I hope that you do. I know you're welcome to reach out to me. I'll try to be better about social media and talk back to you, but anytime you want to reach out. I know Pastor Megan is also doing that as well. So thank you both. Peace be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Next week.
Caitlin just left.
Peace out.
Out of here.